"Sir, I appreciate you bringing the feed, but you can't go back there. It's not safe." The voice was young, firm but trying to be polite. It belonged to a veterinary technician named Maya, who stood with her arms crossed, blocking the hallway that led to the isolation kennels. Samuel Gage stopped his handcart, the dusty bags of premium dog food stacked high. He was a man etched by sun and toil, his flannel shirt worn soft at the elbows, his hands thick with the calluses of a farmer. He smelled faintly of hay and earth. He looked past the young woman, down the concrete corridor where a sound echoed that was part of the reason for her stance. It was a low, guttural growl, a constant, vibrating threat that seemed to make the air itself heavy. He didn't say anything, just held his position, his gaze calm and distant. His stillness was unnerving. It wasn't the hesitant pause of an old man, but the rooted quiet of a mountain. For 3 days, that sound had been the unhappy heartbeat of the county animal shelter, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury trapped in a cage. He had heard it yesterday, and the day before, each time he'd delivered the 50-pound bags that were part of his small supply contract. "We have an extreme aggression case back there," Maya continued, misinterpreting his silence as a lack of understanding. "Animal control brought him in Monday. A Belgian Malinois. He's difficult. Nobody can get near him." Samuel's eyes, the color of a faded sky, finally shifted to meet hers. They held no particular curiosity, just a quiet, patient assessment. He nodded once, a small, economical movement. "I hear him," was all he said. His voice was like his appearance, weathered and low, with a gravelly texture that suggested disuse. He began to turn his handcart, ready to leave as requested, but his movements were deliberate, unhurried. There was an efficiency to him that seemed out of place with the slow, shuffling gait most people expected of a man his age. He didn't waste an inch of motion. As he turned, the shelter's director, Brenda Yates, came striding down the hall, her face a mask of stressed authority. She was a woman who ran on schedules and protocols, and the dog in the back was a problem that fit none of them. "Is that the feed delivery?" she asked, her voice tight. "Maya, make sure it's stacked properly. Kevin is on his way back. We're going to try the tranquilizer dart again." She glanced at Samuel, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "Mr. Gage, thank you. If you could just leave the invoice on the counter." It was a dismissal, polite and professional. She was already turning away, her mind on the bigger, louder problem. But Samuel didn't move. He stood there, a pillar of quiet in the low-grade chaos of the shelter. The growling from the back intensified, punctuated by a sharp, violent clash of metal on concrete as the dog threw itself against something solid. A chorus of nervous barks erupted from the main adoption wing. Brenda flinched, her shoulders tightening. Every person in that building was on edge. The dog wasn't just aggressive, it was intelligent in its rage, and that was far more terrifying. It had already bent the steel bars of a standard kennel, forcing them to move it to the old quarantine run, a concrete room with a heavy chain bolted to the floor. It was a last resort, a solution that felt more like a prison than a shelter, and Brenda hated it. But she hated the idea of one of her staff getting mauled more. She looked back at the old farmer, who was still just standing there, watching her. His placid expression in the face of her crisis was, for a moment, infuriating. It felt like judgment. Dr. Anya Sharma, the shelter's veterinarian, came out of her small office, rubbing her temples. She was young, sharp, and deeply committed, but the situation with the Malinois was wearing her down. She saw the scene. Brenda, wound tighter than a watch spring, Maya, looking nervous, and the old farmer, Samuel Gage, who seemed as immovable and unbothered as one of the ancient oaks on his property. Anya's relationship with Samuel was limited to polite nods during his deliveries, but her grandfather had been a farmer, and she felt a quiet respect for the man's steadfastness. He seemed to belong to an older, quieter world. She had also noticed things others missed. While her grandfather had stooped from a lifetime of labor, Mr. Gage stood unnaturally straight. His posture was perfect, his shoulders square. It was the posture of a man who had been taught to stand that way, drilled into him until it was as natural as breathing. Her own father, a retired Marine gunnery sergeant, stood the same way. It was a small detail, a flicker of incongruity that she had filed away without much thought. Until now. She saw him looking down the forbidden hallway, his head tilted slightly, Not just hearing the noise, but listening to it, analyzing it. There was a difference. Hearing was passive. Listening was an action. Samuel Gage shifted his weight, the worn leather of his boots creaking softly on the linoleum floor. The sound was a stark contrast to the cacophony from the back. He finally spoke again, his question directed at Brenda, but his eyes finding Anya's. "Has he taken any water?" The question was simple, yet its precision cut through the ambient panic. He didn't ask if they'd offered water. He asked if the dog had taken it. It implied an understanding of the difference between opportunity and acceptance, a critical distinction in animal behavior, especially under stress. Brenda blinked, taken aback by the directness from the quiet feed supplier. "We can't get a bowl to him," she said, her tone defensive. "He lunges. He's a danger to himself and to us. We've tried sliding it in, but he just knocks it over." Anya watched Samuel absorb this information. He gave another one of his small, barely perceptible nods. He wasn't judging them. He was gathering data. His gaze went back down the hallway, and for the first time, Anya saw a flicker of something other than placid calm in his eyes. It wasn't pity or fear. It was a deep, resonant sorrow, the kind of sadness that comes from profound understanding. He knew what that dog was going through, not in a sympathetic, civilian way, but in a way that felt personal, intimate. He understood the language of that rage. The front door of the shelter opened with a jingle, and Animal Control Officer Kevin Finch strode in. He was young, athletic, and carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who believed every problem had a solution that could be found in his truck. He was holding a catch pole in one hand and a CO2 powered dart rifle in the other. "All right, Brenda," he said, his voice booming slightly in the tense space. "Let's give Napoleon his afternoon cocktail." He grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. His own confidence was being tested by this dog. His failure to subdue it yesterday was a professional embarrassment. He noticed Samuel standing there with his cart and gave a dismissive nod. "Morning, Pops. Better clear out. We're about to have a little rodeo." The casual disrespect grated on Anya, but Samuel seemed not to hear it. His focus was entirely elsewhere. He turned his body slightly, not to leave, but to better face the director and the vet. He was inserting himself into the conversation without raising his voice or making a grand gesture. His sheer presence was enough. "The dart won't work," he said, his voice flat and certain. It wasn't an opinion, it was a statement of fact. Kevin Finch stopped, his bravado faltering for a second. He looked Samuel up and down. The faded jeans, the worn shirt, the dirt under his fingernails. "And what makes you an expert?" he asked, a sneer playing on his lips. "You some kind of dog whisperer when you're not hauling kibble?" Brenda put a hand on Kevin's arm, shaking her head slightly. She didn't want to antagonize the old man, but she agreed with the sentiment. "Mr. Gage, with all due respect, this is a professional matter," she said. "This animal is a trained weapon. It's not a farm dog." Samuel's gaze remained steady. "That's right," he said softly. "He is. And you're treating him like a rabid stray. You're speaking the wrong language. A tranquilizer will be seen as an attack. His training will tell him to fight it, to keep his feet until he can't. You risk putting him into cardiac arrest." The technical specificity of his warning, "keep his feet, cardiac arrest," was jarring. It was the language of a professional, not a farmer. Anya felt a chill run down her spine. Her father used to talk about training, about how a soldier's body could be pushed to override its own biology through sheer force of will. Samuel was describing the same principle, but in an animal. Anya stepped forward, placing herself between the cocky young officer and the quiet old man. "He's right, Brenda," she said, her voice gaining strength. "The dog's stress levels are already critical. His heart rate is through the roof. A powerful sedative introduced in a high adrenaline state could be fatal." She looked at Samuel, a silent question in her eyes. "What do you suggest?" Brenda looked at her vet as if she had lost her mind. "Anya, what are you doing? We have a protocol for this. We've exhausted all other options. This is the next step. If it doesn't work." She trailed off, but everyone knew what the final step was. Euthanasia. It was a word she despised, a failure she took personally, but her responsibility to her staff and public safety was absolute. The dog was a ticking time bomb. The thought of putting down such a magnificent, healthy animal was tearing her apart, but her hands were tied by procedure and liability. It was a cage of her own. Samuel Gage looked at the three of them, at the tableau of modern animal handling, the frustrated bureaucrat, the overconfident enforcer, and the compassionate scientist. They were all trying, in their own way, and they were all failing. They were outside the circle, trying to shout instructions at a creature that only knew the language from inside. He took a slow breath, the air whistling almost silently through his nostrils. It was the kind of controlled, centering breath Anya had seen soldiers on television take before a mission. "Let me try," he said. The three words hung in the air, simple and immense. Kevin Finch actually laughed, a short, incredulous bark. "You? What are you going to do? Bore him to sleep?" Brenda was more diplomatic, but equally firm. "Mr. Gage, that's impossible. I can't let a civilian enter a dangerous animal enclosure. Our insurance, the county regulations, it's a lawsuit waiting to happen. I can't authorize it." Anya watched Samuel's face. He didn't seem surprised or offended by the refusal. He seemed to expect it. He simply held Brenda's gaze, his own eyes clear and unwavering. There was no pleading in his look, no desperation. There was only a quiet, profound certainty that radiated from him like warmth from a stone. He wasn't asking for permission to be a hero. He was offering a solution because he was the only one in the room who had it. "The dog is dying," he said, his voice dropping even lower, forcing them to lean in to hear. "Not from thirst, not from hunger. He's dying from fear. He's alone in a hostile country, and everyone he sees is an enemy. He doesn't know the rules of engagement. So he's defaulted to his final protective protocol. Deny, defend, destroy." The terminology was chillingly precise. Hostile country, rules of engagement, final protective protocol. This was not the language of a farmer. This was the lexicon of a soldier. Anya's blood ran cold as the pieces began to click into place. The posture, the economy of movement, the tactical language, the unnerving calm. The old farmer wasn't just a farmer. Brenda Yates was pale. The old man's words had bypassed her procedural brain and struck something deeper. He had perfectly articulated the feeling she got from the animal, not mindless rage, but a kind of terrified, defiant duty. Still, she couldn't break the rules. I can't," she stammered. "My job is to protect people." Samuel's gaze softened for the first time. He looked at her not with judgment, but with something like sympathy. "Your job is to run a shelter," he corrected her gently. His job, he said, nodding toward the back, was to protect people. And someone failed him. "Let me go in. He won't hurt me." Anya made a decision. She trusted the strange certainty of this old man more than she trusted the tranquilizer rifle in Kevin's hand. "Brenda," she said, her voice sharp and clear. "Let him. I'll sign any waiver you want. I will take full responsibility. We have a choice between a definite risk of death with the dart or a possible solution with Mr. Gage. Medically and ethically, I think we have to try his way. We're 24 hours from putting him on the list anyway. What is there left to lose?" The silence that followed was broken only by the dog's relentless, rhythmic growl. Brenda looked from Anya's determined face to Samuel's calm one. She saw no ego in him, no desire for glory. She saw only purpose. She felt the rigid walls of her protocol begin to crack. She was failing this dog. Every official method had failed. Maybe an unofficial one was the only thing left. She finally let out a long, shuddering breath, the breath of a woman surrendering control. "Fine," she whispered, the word barely audible. "Fine. But Kevin, you and 2 others are on the door. The second that dog makes a move, you dart him. You dart them both if you have to. Do you understand?" Kevin looked shocked, but he nodded, his hand tightening on the rifle. He didn't like it, but he followed the director's orders. He still thought this was insanity, letting some old-timer wander into a cage with a monster. He was sure he was about to witness a mauling. He motioned for 2 other staff members to follow him, their faces grim. They were all preparing for the worst. Samuel Gage simply nodded his thanks to Brenda and Anya. He didn't offer any more assurances. He didn't need to. He handed his worn work gloves to Maya, who took them with a trembling hand. Then he turned and began to walk down the concrete hallway toward the sound, his footsteps measured and steady. He walked not like a farmer approaching a barn, but like a soldier approaching a line he had crossed 1,000 times before. Anya followed, along with the armed and nervous escort. The air grew colder as they approached the quarantine run. The smell of fear, a sharp, coppery scent, mingled with the sterile smell of disinfectant. The growling was louder here, a physical presence that vibrated through the soles of their shoes. They reached the heavy steel door. A small, barred window was set at eye level. Kevin peered through it first. "He's in the back corner," he reported, his voice a tense whisper. "Chain's taut. He's watching the door." Samuel didn't look through the window. He didn't need to. He was assessing the environment with his other senses. He could feel the tension, hear the slight scrape of the dog's claws on the concrete as it shifted its weight. He was building a picture in his mind. "Open it," Samuel said quietly. Kevin hesitated, then fumbled with the heavy bolt. With a loud metallic clang, the lock slid back. The growling inside instantly escalated into a volley of ferocious barks. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Samuel put a hand on the door, stopping Kevin from swinging it wide. He pushed it open just a crack, no more than a few inches, and then he waited. He didn't try to peek. He didn't speak. He just stood there, letting the dog get used to the change, to the new scent in the air, the scent of earth and hay and something else, something old and familiar that the dog's instincts might recognize beneath the layers of fear. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The barking slowly subsided, replaced once more by the low, continuous growl. Anya held her breath, her heart pounding against her ribs. She was watching a master at work, though she didn't yet know what he was a master of. He was patient, preternaturally so. He was letting the dog make the next move, ceding control of the situation to the terrified animal to build a fragile bridge of trust. Finally, Samuel spoke. His voice was soft, barely a murmur, pitched just to carry through the crack in the door. He wasn't speaking to the dog, not yet. He was speaking to the men behind him. "Stay back from the door. Don't crowd me. And for God's sake, lower the rifle. He can smell your fear, and he can see that thing for what it is." Kevin looked indignant, but a sharp glance from Anya made him reluctantly lower the barrel of the dart gun to his side. Samuel took another slow breath and then slipped through the narrow opening, pulling the heavy door closed behind him. He didn't latch it, leaving it free to be pulled open from the outside. He was now alone in the concrete room with the chained animal. The rest of them were just spectators, peering through the small, barred window. The scene inside was stark. The room was bare except for a drain in the floor and a heavy iron ring bolted to the concrete, from which a thick chain led to a tactical collar around the Malinois' neck. The dog was magnificent and terrible, a coiled spring of muscle and teeth. Its fur was matted with filth, its eyes were wild, red-rimmed with exhaustion and stress, but its posture was pure, disciplined aggression. It stood at the full length of its chain, hackles raised, teeth bared in a silent snarl. Samuel did not look at the dog. This was the first thing Anya noticed that was profoundly strange. Anyone else would have fixed their gaze on the threat, but Samuel's eyes were elsewhere. He scanned the room methodically. The corners, the ceiling, the anchor point of the chain, the closed door behind him. It was a threat assessment of the environment, not the occupant. He was mapping the space, understanding its limitations and possibilities. He moved slowly, angling his body so he was never facing the dog directly, presenting a smaller, less confrontational profile. He kept his hands loose and visible at his sides. He was a portrait of non-aggression, yet there was nothing submissive about him. He moved with a quiet authority that seemed to subtly alter the atmosphere in the room. The dog's growl faltered for a moment, its head cocking in confusion. This human was behaving all wrong. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't advancing with a pole or a bowl. He wasn't cowering. He was just there. Samuel stopped about 15 feet away, well outside the radius of the chain. He lowered himself to a crouch, again with that surprising economy of motion, no groaning or stiffness. He rested his forearms on his knees and finally, for the first time, he let his eyes rest in the dog's general direction, but not directly on its face. He looked at a point on the floor just in front of it, and then he began to speak. The words were soft, rhythmic, a low murmur. Anya, pressing her ear to the window, couldn't make them out at first. It wasn't English. She thought at first it might be German or perhaps Dutch, as many of the best working dogs were trained in those languages. The dog seemed to think so too. Its posture stiffened, the growl deepening again, recognizing the cadence of command but not the specific sounds. It was a language it had been trained to be wary of, the language of a potential enemy operator. The dog took a half step forward, the chain straining. Through the window, Kevin raised his rifle again. "He's going to lunge," he hissed. But Anya put a hand on his arm. "Wait," she breathed. "Look at Mr. Gage." The old farmer hadn't flinched. He had simply stopped talking, watching the dog's reaction, processing the new information. He closed his eyes for a brief second, and in that moment, his face seemed to shed 50 years. Anya saw the ghost of a young man, sharp and focused, a man standing not in a concrete kennel in rural America, but somewhere dusty and dangerous, a world away. When he opened his eyes, they were different. The farmer was gone. Someone else was looking out. He shifted his weight slightly, a minute adjustment, and took one slow, deliberate breath. The air in the room seemed to grow still and heavy. He did not speak a foreign language this time. He spoke a single word, barely a whisper, a sound that was more of a breath than a word. It was a name, but not a name one would give a pet. It was a code. Kestrel. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. It was as if an electric current had shot through the Malinois. The snarling ceased. The bared teeth were covered. The hackles on its back smoothed down. The dog froze, every muscle locked, its body a statue of perfect, rigid attention. Its head, which had been lowered in aggression, snapped up. Its ears swiveled forward, and its wild, hate-filled eyes cleared, becoming intensely focused, intelligent, and questioning. It stared at Samuel, not as a threat, but as a source. It was the sound it had been trained to wait for, the one sound in the world that meant safety, purpose, and mission. It was the key that unlocked the soldier inside the animal. Through the window, Brenda Yates gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Kevin Finch stood frozen, his rifle forgotten in his grasp. He was staring at a miracle. Samuel remained in his crouch, perfectly still. He let the silence stretch, giving the dog a moment to process, to shift its entire state of being from feral survival to trained obedience. Then he spoke again, his voice no longer a whisper but a quiet, firm command. The word was English, simple and direct. Stand. The Malinois didn't just obey. It executed the command with breathtaking precision. Its movement was fluid and instantaneous, shifting from its defensive posture into a formal, disciplined stance, its eyes locked on the old man, awaiting its next instruction. The transformation was total. The snarling, terrified beast was gone. In its place was a highly trained military asset. Samuel then rose slowly to his feet. He walked forward, closing the distance between them. The dog did not move. It watched him, its tail giving a single, tentative thump against the concrete floor. It recognized not the man's face, but his bearing, his scent, and most of all, the authority in his voice that came with the call sign. This was his handler. Maybe not the first one, but one of them. A friendly. Samuel reached the end of the chain. He didn't reach for the dog. He knelt again and calmly began to examine the heavy tactical collar. His fingers, though thick and calloused from farm work, moved with the deftness of a surgeon, checking the fittings, the clasp, the D-ring where the chain was attached. The dog, Kestrel, lowered its head, nudging the man's hand, and for the first time in 3 days, it made a new sound, a low, anxious whine. It was the sound of relief, of a soldier finding his commander in the middle of a war zone. Samuel murmured to the dog, the same low, rhythmic tones as before, and this time Anya could hear the reassurance in them. He unclipped the heavy chain from the collar. Outside the room, Brenda let out a choked sob. Kevin just shook his head in disbelief, slowly lowering his rifle completely. He had been ready to shoot a monster, but the monster had vanished. He was looking at a partnership. Samuel stood up, the heavy chain pulled at his feet. "Heel," he commanded softly. Kestrel moved instantly to his left side, sitting perfectly aligned with his leg, its shoulder pressed gently against his knee. No leash was necessary. The connection between them was stronger than any steel. The old farmer turned and walked toward the door, the powerful dog moving with him as if they were a single organism. He pushed the door open and stepped out into the hallway, into the stunned silence of his audience. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Brenda Yates stared, her carefully constructed world of rules and procedures shattered. Kevin Finch looked from the calm, obedient dog to the weathered old man, his youthful arrogance completely gone, replaced by a profound and humbling respect. It was Anya who finally found her voice, her words barely a whisper. Mr. Gage, who are you? Samuel didn't answer immediately. He was running a gentle hand over Kestrel's head, his fingers finding the small, tattooed serial number inside the dog's ear. He was still in that other world, a place of dust and duty. I'm just a farmer now, he said, his voice distant. But Anya shook her head, her mind racing, connecting the dots her father's stories had provided. The posture, the tactical language, the call sign. No, she said, her voice gaining certainty. You were a handler. That's not just a K9. He's a MWD, a military working dog. Special operations. Samuel finally looked up, his faded blue eyes meeting hers. He saw in her face not just curiosity, but a deep, inherited understanding. He gave a small, sad smile. Something like that, he admitted. A long time ago, we didn't call ourselves handlers. We were partners. Brenda finally found her feet and her voice. She stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her, her face a mixture of awe and deep remorse for how she had treated him. I am so sorry, Mr. Gage. I had no idea. We were going to almost. She couldn't finish the sentence. The thought of what she had almost authorized, the euthanasia of this incredible animal, was too horrifying. Samuel looked at her with kindness, not a hint of "I told you so" in his expression. You were doing your job with the information you had, he said. He doesn't know how to be anything but what he is. Living in our world is hard for him. It's loud and confusing. No clear mission. No one watching his back. As he spoke, Kestrel leaned more heavily against his leg, as if to confirm the words. He was home. Kevin Finch stepped forward, his face flushed with shame. He looked directly at Samuel, his eyes meeting the old man's. Sir, he said, the word sir now carrying its full weight. I apologize for my disrespect. I've never seen anything like that in my life. How did you know? This was the teaching moment. Samuel could have dismissed him, could have held on to the quiet mystery, but he saw a genuine desire to learn in the young officer's eyes. He saw a chance to pass something on. I knew because I helped train the first generation of them, he explained, his voice patient. We were a small unit. Experimental. We worked with dogs that were different, smarter, faster, more intuitive. We learned their language as much as they learned ours. Each dog was paired with a handler, and they were given a unique call sign. That word isn't just a name. It's an activation key. It bypasses the fear and the confusion and goes straight to the core of their training. It means I am friendly, and I have the mission. He looked down at Kestrel. He probably got lost in transit or sold off after his tour was done. It happens. The people who get them don't get the instruction manual. They just see a big, scary dog they can't control. He then looked at Kevin. You have good instincts, son. You're just using too much force. With dogs like this, force is a challenge. You have to beat them with patience, with quiet. You have to become the safest place in the room. Over the next few hours, the shelter was transformed. Under Samuel's quiet guidance, Kestrel was moved to a comfortable, open kennel. He allowed Anya to give him a full examination, to draw blood, and to treat the raw sores on his legs from where he'd thrown himself against the chain. He took water from a bowl held steady in the old farmer's hand. Samuel worked with the staff, showing them the proper way to approach, the low, soft tones to use. He turned a crisis into a master class in animal behavior. Anya, using the tattoo number Samuel had found, started making calls. The search was difficult, navigating a labyrinth of military bureaucracy and privatized security contractors. It turned out Samuel's guess was right. The dog, officially named CX-117B, had been retired from a classified JSOC unit and sold to a private security firm for executive protection. He had escaped from a transport vehicle during a highway accident 2 states over. He had been wandering for weeks, a ghost soldier lost in a foreign land, his training making him a menace to the well-meaning civilians who tried to help him. By the end of the day, a solution had been found. A representative from the security firm was horrified to learn what had happened and was preparing to drive down to retrieve the dog. But as Brenda explained the situation, she watched Samuel and Kestrel through her office window. The old man was sitting on the floor of the kennel run, and the powerful dog had its head in his lap, fast asleep, snoring softly. For the first time in days, perhaps weeks, the animal was at peace. A deep, trusting bond had been forged in that concrete room, a bond of shared language and shared history. To separate them now seemed like a cruelty beyond measure. Brenda made a decision that was completely against protocol, but entirely from the heart. She called the firm back and began a negotiation. She told them about the old farmer, carefully omitting the full extent of his background but emphasizing the unique connection. She talked about stability, about a quiet farm being a better retirement for a warrior than a noisy corporate compound. She offered to handle the adoption paperwork, to waive all fees, to make it happen. When Samuel was preparing to leave, loading his empty feed bags onto his cart, Brenda and Anya approached him. "The firm has agreed," Brenda said, a genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. "They're signing him over to the shelter, and we'd like to sign him over to you. If you'll have him." Samuel stopped what he was doing. He looked over at the kennel where Kestrel was now standing, watching him, his tail wagging slowly. The old man's weathered face was impossible to read, but Anya saw the slight shimmer of moisture in his eyes. He had long ago made peace with his quiet life, his past packed away like an old uniform. He hadn't realized a part of him was still on patrol, waiting for his partner to come home. He looked at the two women, his quiet dignity a palpable force. "I reckon I've got room for one more on the farm," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. He didn't need to sign any papers right then. Everyone knew Kestrel had already been adopted the moment Samuel had whispered his name. He left his cart where it was and walked to the kennel. He opened the door, and Kestrel trotted out, immediately taking up his position at the old soldier's heel. Together, they walked out the front door of the shelter and into the setting sun, a man and his dog, two veterans of a silent war, finally reunited and heading for home.